Hello, so in this video I'm going to talk through some content for topic 5 of paper 1, which is Britain 1625 to 1701. And topic 5, as you can see here, is how revolutionary in the years to 1701 was the glorious revolution of 1688 to 89. I've done another video on the exam technique for topic 5, so this video is just going to be covering the content and the kind of approach that you should take to revision for this topic. So firstly, excuse me, you can see the specification there on the left-hand side. So the 4 bullet points: significance of revolutionary ideals in the establishment of constitutional monarchy. So that's really about the difference between the Whig view at the time that James had broken the social contract, and therefore it was justified in allowing William and Mary to take the throne. The impact of the Toleration Act and the end of Anglican supremacy, I'll talk about that in a second. The significance of the Triennial Act, 1694, and the growth of parliamentary power, I'll talk about that in a second. And finally, the importance of William III's wars and the development of a financial revolution. Again, I'll talk about that in a second. So the way to think about this topic is that there really are 4 key overarching questions that you need to have in your mind when you're revising this. And if you structure your revision into these 4 key areas, you're going to be in a really good place. So as you can see on the right-hand side, I've put these as key questions. So the first one is about the changing balance of power between the monarch and parliament. In other words, to what extent did the Glorious Revolution change the balance of power between the monarch and parliament? And you could think about that. What happens in 88 and 89? And then what happens all the way up to 1701? So you might have a different answer if you just asked about 88 and 89 compared to all the way up to 1701. The end of Anglican supremacy. To what extent did the Glorious Revolution lead to the end of Anglican supremacy? Again, I'm going to go through content for all of these. To what extent was there a financial revolution as a result of the Glorious Revolution and the kind of causes of the financial revolution? You could also think about the political impact of the financial revolution. And then finally, a question that's come up a few times is a kind of overarching question of just how revolutionary was the Glorious Revolution, which really covers everything, all the content in this topic. So here is a revision pack that I've made, and it just goes through some key content here. And the way that I would suggest you structure your revision is those 4 key overarching questions. Just have evidence for and against. And then the interpretations will usually be some angle on that. So I'm just going to run through some of that now. So to begin with, in terms of the different historical interpretations, you do not need to discuss these in your essays, your section C interpretations essays. You can, if it's helpful to kind of weave this in, it might be something you could do, but you don't need to. You can still, get to the highest level without doing that. In fact, I think sometimes it can actually be detrimental, to try and put these in there, because sometimes people make a mistake and say somebody's a Marxist or this view is revisionist when actually it's not. So actually it's there. You can, potentially put it in, but I'd say generally you don't need to. Here is the kind of very, very brief overview of those different views. You can pause it and take a note of those. So the first key question is this idea of the balance of power. So here is the key evidence for that. So things like the Bill of Rights, Triennial Act, Lapse of Licensing Act, Parliament limiting the army, the Bill of Resumption, and the Act of Settlement. I'm not going to run through what each of these things were. You've obviously got your notes and you've got the textbook, but these are the kind of piece of evidence you could use in that answer to weigh up the interpretations. But it's good for you to have your own view on this. So, looking at that, there might be other pieces of evidence that you're aware of that you could use. Think about an answer. To what extent did these things change the balance of power? Okay. And then moving on to end of Anglican supremacy. The key piece of evidence here is the Toleration Act of 1689, and it's really important to know some kind of counterpoints to this idea that it gave toleration, because the Test and Corporation Act was still in place. However, it's a big change from the Clarendon Code, isn't it? So you can go back and use evidence from earlier on to weigh up, the change. And by 1714, there were 400,000 dissenters, which is quite a good piece of evidence to show the kind of impact of the Toleration Act. Again, you should have your own argument. What do you think? Did the Toleration Act of 1689 lead to the end of Anglican supremacy? And then the third key question is, to what extent was there a financial revolution, or causes of the financial revolution? It could be something like, was it ideological? Was it pragmatic? Was it due to the war? So here's some evidence. The 9 Years' War, you could get some information about, for example, the debt due to the war, Public Accounts Commission, land tax, Bank of England, Recoinage Act, and Civil List. So that's the kind of key evidence that you could use. And again, weigh up to what extent was there a financial revolution. Again, you could compare it to the earlier period where the Stuart monarchs had faced pretty serious financial difficulties, and how this is a contrast to that. Maybe Parliament had learned from that. So as it says here, keep in mind evidence from the earlier period to compare how things have changed. All right, so that's the kind of key evidence. A good thing to do, and I'll just change my screen here, is something like this, where you've got a timeline of the key evidence. And really, I think most things for this topic are on here. There might be a few little bits and bobs that aren't, but most things are on here. And kind of color code them into the different key questions, so you're aware of how things changed. Obviously, I haven't put the dates on these because this is an activity that we can do where we add the dates, and then you can see how things change over time. So, for example, 1697 is a bit of a turning point, isn't it? Because it's the end of the 9 Years' War. Parliament limits the army. And then you've got the Civil List Act limiting the army again, the Bill of Resumption, Act of Settlement. So things really kind of speed up after 1697, 1694 as well, with the Triennial Act and the Bank of England. Another important year here, obviously 1689 as well, with the Toleration Act and Bill of Rights. But just so you can see, if an interpretation is focusing on a key year, if you've got this kind of timeline in your head, you're aware of what's going on at that time. Okay, so I hope that's been helpful, just to run through the key content. Just to go back to the start, I think the main thing to think about is these key overarching questions. Obviously, the interpretations might tweak these a little bit, might be slightly different. But if you've got good range of evidence, for and against these overarching questions, you'll be in a good place for any interpretation that you get. Obviously, you can watch the other video to talk where I talk about exam technique for topic 5. Okay, I hope that has been useful. Thanks.